then swallow still, and then cough and clear and re-swallow. Sometimes we just do a throat clear, like we skip this step, and then we ask our patient after they've swallowed to clear their throat and re-swallow. If that's enough to expel any penetration, then you don't have to do every single one of these steps. You might just have them do a throat clear. Everybody with me still? So that's another option sometimes to tell people we want you to throat clear or cough, what you need in order to clear any material or any food or liquid that might get in your throat while you're swallowing. And also, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but for the most part, when you're speaking with patients, try not to use, dysphagia speak. You want to use dysphagia speak with your colleagues and with, other healthcare professionals, but some people don't know what aspiration is. Some people don't know. Certainly, they don't know what penetration is. They may or may not know really. Tell them not to Google it. So, they may not know the word residue, so you may say things like, you're leaving some leftover in your throat. Or sometimes when you're swallowing, it's going down the wrong pipe, so it's ending up in your lungs instead of in your stomach, So you have to be, so when you're teaching them this maneuver, you're going to tell them to swallow and then tell them, this is, you're working on holding your swallow at its highest point. That's kind of what I would tell them instead of talking about anatomy. Unless I have a good picture and I have a patient that I feel like can really comprehend all that. Some of it depends on people's education levels and such. Okay. We have talked quite a bit, I think, about diets as well, right? So, but just a couple of things to think about. So, thin liquids, people often think that thin liquids are the easiest thing to swallow, right? And they are after you've had a surgery, let's say, and you don't have any dysphagia. But thin liquids can be the hardest thing for some of our neuro patients to swallow, because if your swallow is delayed, which happens a lot with our neuro patients, then the thin liquids fall back before the patient can initiate the swallow. And so they very often will have difficulty with thin liquids. So if you have a patient who can't have thin liquids, I think we talked about some of this. Anything that melts to a liquid before it's swallowed is considered a thin liquid, like ice cream or jello, broth, any juice, coffee, tea, that's all thin liquid. If you have a thin gravy, that is considered thin. Any fruit with a high water content. So that can include things like citrus, melon, pineapple, all of those that we love because they're so yummy and juicy, right? Oranges, those are all considered thin. Tomatoes, any vegetables with a high water content, so like squash, zucchini, and of course milk. So these are all things that can be considered. So don't just think if it's in a cup, right? Because it's not just things in a cup that are thin. There are some other things that you have to consider as well. So now for some patients, like where it says indicated for reduced pharyngeal wall contraction and reduced CP opening, so sometimes you'll have patients who have a stricture, and so their upper esophageal segment doesn't open real well, or they've had a cervical fusion, and they've got a lot of pharyngeal swelling, let's say. Because it used to be also that they went in and did the cervical fusion fusions from the back, the doctors found that the cervical fusions heal better going in anteriorly. So now they've taken to doing them anteriorly. Well, when they open this up and go back to the spine, to the vertebrae, right, to fuse the vertebrae, guess what they have to move out of the way and go through, right, to get back there. So it's great for the fusion, but it's not so great for the swallowing. So since they started to do that, the referrals for cervical fusions for speech therapists have skyrocketed because the patients have difficulty swallowing a lot of the time after cervical fusions. So sometimes they just have, there are certain things that will make the throat swell and be really edemic, like a cervical fusion. And for that type of patient, you probably are going to go with a thin liquid, right? You would want to suggest that, okay? But anybody, like our neuro patients, often have a delayed swallow trigger, or if you've got a patient, a trauma patient or TBI patient, let's say from poor oral control, that might be another patient that you would think, well, he's not managing his thin liquids well, can't control it, the liquid prematurely spills before the patient's able to initiate their swallow, okay? So that would be thin. Then we have the thicker consistency. So nectar, honey, or pudding. So sometimes we look at nectar and honey are still considered like nectar, thick liquids is how we would write that, or we could say honey, thick liquids when we test somebody or when we make the recommendation for the diet. Depending on how much difficulty and how delayed the swallow is, patients who don't tolerate thins might do fine with nectar, so it just may need to be thickened a little bit so that they get better control. But let's say the swallow is very delayed, let's say the control is very poor, then you're going to want to go ahead and try a honey or maybe even a pudding, right? If they're really delayed or if the bolus isn't cohesive and it just keeps falling back. So if you've got patients who have issues with bolus control and delayed swallow trigger, you might have to, well, not might, you typically do have to watch those different consistencies on your modified variant swallow study and see if there's a consistency that works for that patient that they can manage to swallow safely so that they're at decreased risk of penetration or aspiration. The patients don't like thickened products. I'm just going to tell you that. So up front, so always think about, I mean, only do this if you have to, right? So you also, if you're able to use compensatory strategies with thin liquids and be safe, you know, you want to try those things during your modified or your fees. Because if they can swallow thin liquids safely with a chin tuck, you want to do that before versus, right, nectar with no chin tuck. Does everybody follow that? So you want to do whatever is least restrictive for that patient's diet while keeping them safe. Okay? There are products out there that thicken thin liquid. So there's Thicket and there's Simply Fit. Thicket is like a powder solution where you have to spoon it in there and you mix it together. Thicket is pretty awful stuff. It changes the consistency, the texture, right? It doesn't just change the consistency, but also the texture. And the problem is if, let's say, you stir something in and then you sit it down and you're talking to somebody and then you go back for another sip a few minutes later, the longer it sits, it kind of congeals gel-based changes the consistency, but it doesn't have the same issues like with turning things lumpy. It doesn't change the texture or the taste quite as much as the powder does, okay? So hopefully your patient can afford that because that's more expensive than the powder stuff. Most of this stuff is available just at a pharmacy. Okay, so we watched that goofy little video. Oh wait, before I go to that. So nectar consistency includes things like the nectars that you guys are going to purchase to try. Tomato juice, which to me, when you buy tomato juice, it would have to be like the thicker stuff, right? Like the V8, real thick. Nectar, so a creamed soup could be considered a nectar. Ensure and buttermilk. Or our buttermilk. And then, let's see. So you can also, some people will also, you can thicken with, like, I've got here baby cereal, blenderized rice, mashed potatoes. So I guess if you can find things that can thicken things up, you can use those. There are herbal thickeners. One is called Kuzu, K-U-Z-U. I've not used these, but I'm just letting you know in case you see clinicians who have been creative with names. Kuzu and arrowroot are herbal thickeners. Okay, so the lemon ice or lemon flavored drinks, that's kind of the same idea as the sour bolus, right? Where sometimes patients, if you give more sensory input, it will help to, it'll help the swallow to initiate a little bit quicker. So some people can, alternate or every third bite, just depends on the severity of the swallow, have a little lemon ice or lemon flavored drink to help initiate the swallow. Carbonated beverages, I think I mentioned this before, that there's an article out there about the sensory information that is provided by carbonation because of the bubbly. And so sometimes carbonated